existence is a perfection. That comes down to how you define perfection.
Yeah.
And
That's why those type of arguments are weak premises or could be considered weak premises because you're including subjective terms.
Yeah.
that's
That's
like
what
me
makes it a
saying,
problem. And
it's,
technically speaking, that's usually the critique against Anselm's ontological argument. I'm not
Well,
saying that they're
I'm
sound critiques, it's just
yeah.
that's kind of the direction they come from.
Well, I mean, like the main critique that's given is firstly, Guanalos is pretty popular, where like just because a thing is said to be perfect doesn't actually mean that it exists, so the conclusion therefore
Yeah, we
doesn't
don't have
follow.
yeah.
Yeah, and secondly, like the main one, as you mentioned or as you alluded to, was just the second premise being derided. Like, is existence inherently good? Like, you would have
Yeah.
to prove that. So, yeah,
Beesman, would you call the one that I was referring to with the maximally
Plantinga's
great?
I
How do you
posted
spell
it.
that? Oh,
Uh
okay, okay.
Plantinga's is like it's a response against propositional logic, basically. So
Yeah,
it's a
but
type
what
of
does maximally weak look
right.
like?
It's a type of ontological argument that isn't going to try to invoke universal claims.
yeah. I
It,
mean,
it
oh wait,
it's a
what
synthetic attempt at a ontological argument.
Bisma, let me ask you something then. As we all know, like it's a called Aquinas's proofs for for God's existence. It's called the five ways because he adduces five things.
Hmm.
One of those arguments is the argument from degrees of perfection. So,
Yeah.
what would be your thoughts on that specific line of reasoning?
I mean, the same criticisms that I have that, the term's perfection is a subjective term. Secondly, I wouldn't consider Thomas's arguments to be objective arguments. Like they could be objective like in a logical sense, right? So like for a Thomist we would still believe that those the logical distinctions are real because the mind is real, right? And that's because basic St. Thomas is does kind of like follow Anselm's presuppositions about no intelligibility. But I think it's more scientifically realist just to say that, they're just logical demonstrations and that the crux of it really isn't saying anything about the truth value of what the natural world is, but we are using the natural world as a categorical referent as part of the logical demonstration for the concept of God. And so, like, Anselm's argument, if I'm correct, right, or I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it has to do with demonstrating that the concept of God is the greatest conceivable concept, right, that a
Yeah.
mind can hold. That's where it starts.
Yes.
That's the first major premise.
Yes.
And I believe that St. Thomas's five ways is a way of addressing how we can assume that to be the case. You get what I mean? Because the rest of Anselm's the conclusion would follow, and you'd be able to make a stronger case for it as long as you can reinforce the first premise.
Yeah. Um. Well, that's getting at something greater. Within like both of the summas. Um. So, uh, Aquinas doesn't actually present these arguments by themselves.
Correct.
And especially the contingency and motion arguments. Um, basically, the entirety of the Summa is supposed to be individual parts making or supplementing those arguments. So yeah, you are correct. Once you go about proving God's attributes, then Anselm's argument seems to follow.
Right. So it's a strengthening of the first premise. Um, it's undefeatable because in order to defeat the argument, you have to start rejecting the formal laws within first order logic. At least that's what we see from challengers to um, contingency or motion as
Hmm.
inductive premises
Yeah.
or axioms, excuse me, on their own. So That's why to me, I'll say, yeah, these are the undefeatable demonstrations. Have you read the documents um, on the synodality of the synodality on synodality?
No, but I heard, I mean, everyone just dismissed them, and I heard they weren't very good.
Well, as Catholics, I think I'm going to add that to our quote unquote working schema as things like, when there's like enough of us in the room at the same time for us to like review together as, Catholic brethren or whatever, because it's binding on all of us.
Hmm.
And there's some pretty interesting things about it that I think we should be aware of.
Okay.
And more so, I'm like curious to see like, how how we see it. Not saying that like, we're the best interpreters or anything, but that's part of the ambiguity that's within the document. But
Hmm.
it's not binding on all of us because they declared it as part of ordinary magisterial teaching.
Yeah.
It includes a redefinition of the sensus fidei, or a modification to it. Um,
Gary Goose, 7 articles against the Novella Theologiae.
yeah. Oh, do you want to go over that?
Well, I mean, I was just joking, but I figured you would be interested in it.
Okay. Yes, I would.
I mean, it's more of like an obscure topic, though, for the average Catholic.
Like the more I like, so I have been, I'm like halfway through that article that you graciously were able to send me. Um, the more I'm reading Gallagher, like the more I'm like really, because a lot of his criticisms apply to the Vatican II. Dude, he was literally criticizing the council before it even happened. Part of the reason why we have ambiguity or the possibility for weaponized ambiguity is because of the addition of virtual distinctions within the conciliar theology.
Hmm.
It's just a privation, right? So it's not that we can't have like real virtual distinctions as part of like systematic theology, but it's being misappropriated in a way to give, like, you're going to see that in the synod on synodality documents. You can't necessarily say that some of these revisions aren't true, but it's kind of a form of question begging that they're sticking in, like whether it's Timothy Radcliffe's speculation on Eucharistic homosexual fornication. Like in Timothy Radcliffe's case, he thinks it's enough if we can both agree on that sex shouldn't just be this mechanistic kind of a thing, then we get rid of one objection away from whether or not homosexual union still has the kind, it can be mutual, it can be generous, it can be compassionate, all this stuff.
Yeah.
And if we could just get rid of the objections from from the consideration of homosexual union away from those that are shared between like regular heterosexual like evils, I guess. Like it's just a form of question begging. Then he's just assuming that, hey, there could be, good things about homosexual union in that Eucharistic sense. I don't
Hmm.
know. Think about Vatican approving or revising or updating the program for priestly formation in Italian Bishops' Conference. They're including an extra virtual distinction of those with transitory homosexual inclinations, like, can be admitted to the seminary. Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, we
It's
spoke
pretty
about this
common sense.
before.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, yeah. Anyways, I don't know. Yeah. I think it is kind of worthwhile to go through Gary Gulaganash.
Okay.
Kind of
It's
meandering
fun.
right now.